Here's a powerful, suspenseful English hook for your YouTube video, with curiosity built in and a strong call to action placed right where the suspense kicks in. In a quiet Tennessee town, a family was found dead under circumstances so strange, investigators couldn't explain a single clue, except for one: a broken gold pendant with mysterious tie markings. What they discovered next would unravel secrets no one in the town was ready to face. But when the suspect finally spoke, he didn't just confess. He opened a door to something far darker than murder. If you want to hear the chilling truth and witness how this night spiraled into the unimaginable, stay with me until the end. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe right now and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because what happens next will leave you speechless. If you want, I can also make a shorter, punchier version perfect for grabbing attention in the first 5 seconds of the video. That way, viewers instantly feel hooked before you go into the full intro. The night was quiet in the small Tennessee town, until the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness. Neighbors pressed their faces to fogged-up windows, watching deputies lead a handcuffed man toward the sheriff's cruiser. Some whispered his name. Others refused to speak it, as if saying it would make the horror more real. For months, the community had lived in fear. Whispers circling about the murder of the Miller family, a tragedy no one could understand. They'd been a warm, welcoming household, the kind where porch lights stayed on late, and neighbors were always offered a plate of food. The sheriff had called it the most disturbing crime scene in county history. 3 lives stolen in a single night. No signs of forced entry. And only one clue left behind. A gold necklace, broken in 2. Its pendant etched with intricate tie patterns. That seemed wildly out of place in rural Tennessee. Detectives searched for months. They checked pawn shops, combed through online marketplaces, and even called cultural experts to trace the design back to its origin. It led them to a small Thai grocery store on the outskirts of Nashville, run by a soft-spoken elderly woman, who remembered selling that exact pendant to a man. His accent Southern, his hands trembling as he counted crumpled bills. When deputies finally found him, he was living in a run-down trailer, just miles from the Miller home. Inside, they discovered photos of the family. Some taken from far away, others from inside their own living room. But one thing didn't make sense. In every photo, the family was smiling, like they knew him. And in one image, tucked behind the frame, was a handwritten note in Thai. Its paper stained and edges burned, the ink barely legible. It read, "They trusted me. I owed them the truth." No one could explain what that meant. And when they asked the suspect, he only smiled, tilted his head, and whispered something in Thai that no one in the room could understand. The sheriff called in an interpreter, but before the man could translate, the suspect leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the rain-soaked window, and began to hum a Thai lullaby, the kind mothers sing to children to keep away nightmares. The sound was soft at first, barely louder than the patter of rain against the glass. But it seemed to wrap around the room, pulling everyone into a strange, uneasy stillness. The interpreter froze mid-step, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to fear. He asked the deputies to turn off the lights. No one understood why, but they did. In the dim glow from the window, the suspect kept humming, his eyes closing as if he were somewhere else entirely. Then, in a low voice, the interpreter spoke. "That lullaby. It's not just for children. In Thai villages, it's sometimes sung before someone is taken away." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Taken away where?" he asked. The interpreter didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to the note found behind the photograph. The truth he owed them. It's not about money. And it's not about revenge. The suspect's humming stopped. His eyes opened slowly. And for the first time that night, he spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "They weren't supposed to be here. The room went silent. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming on the roof of the sheriff's office. One deputy shifted in his chair. Who wasn't supposed to be here? The man's gaze flicked toward the door, as though he expected someone or something to walk in. Then he leaned forward, the cuffs rattling against the table, and whispered a name that no one recognized. A name that sounded nothing like English, yet carried the weight of something ancient, something that didn't belong in Tennessee at all. The interpreter's eyes widened at the sound of it, as if the very syllables had cut through him. He stepped back, shaking his head. That name, it's not Thai, he said quietly. It's older. Much older. The sheriff frowned. What the hell are you talking about? The interpreter didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a worn leather notebook. Flipping through yellowed pages, he stopped on a sketch, a circular symbol with curling lines, eerily similar to the pendant found at the crime scene. This mark, the interpreter said, tapping the page, is only used in a very old belief system from the border regions, said to be a seal, to keep something in, or to keep something out. The suspect chuckled low and hoarse. You think I killed them, he said. They let it in. Every hair on the back of the sheriff's neck stood up. What did they let in? The man leaned forward until his breath fogged the table's surface. You'll see, he murmured, his smile curling in a way that made the deputies take an involuntary step back. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang sharply, cutting through the tension like a blade. The sheriff didn't move to answer it. His eyes locked on the suspect. But then the rain outside stopped. Completely. No one noticed right away. Not until the station's lights flickered, and the faint hum of the lullaby began again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the man in cuffs. It was coming from the hallway, soft at first, like it was drifting in from far away, but growing clearer with every note. The deputies exchanged glances. One reached for his sidearm. The other moved toward the door. The sheriff raised a hand, motioning for them to stay put. But the humming didn't stop. It grew richer, layered, as though more than one voice was singing now. The suspect's smile widened. She's here, he whispered. A shadow passed by the frosted glass window in the door. Too tall to be a child, too slender to be a man. The interpreter stepped forward, his voice trembling. If that's what I think it is, no lock in this building will matter. The sheriff's grip tightened on the edge of the table. Who? The man in cuffs closed his eyes. The one they brought with them from across the water. The one who doesn't forgive. The hallway lights began to dim, one by one, as if something unseen was swallowing the power. A slow creak echoed from the far end of the hall, the sound of a door opening. But no one had moved to open it. Then came the footsteps, bare feet, but dragging slightly, like whoever they belonged to was in no hurry at all. Each step landed with a damp slap against the linoleum, leaving faint streaks of water that glistened in the flickering light. No one in the room breathed. The sheriff motioned toward the door, but the deputies hesitated, their instincts screaming not to open it. The humming grew louder, woven now with a faint whisper, a language that curled in the ear like smoke, impossible to understand but heavy with intent. The interpreter's hands shook as he pressed himself against the wall. She's not singing to us, he murmured. She's calling to him. The suspect lifted his head slowly, as if hearing a voice only he could truly make out. Finally, he said. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. No knock. No rattle of the handle, only silence. Then, a single droplet of water slid under the threshold, spreading across the floor like ink in paper. It crept toward the suspect's chair, curling around the legs before stopping at his boots. The sheriff reached for his weapon, but before he could draw, the lights snapped off completely. In the pitch black, the lullaby swelled, joined by a second voice. this one sounding like a child's. The child's voice was high and thin, threading through the darkness like a needle through cloth. It didn't sound afraid. It sounded welcoming. The suspect began to hum along, matching their pitch perfectly, as if they'd rehearsed this moment for years. A sudden metallic click echoed, the sound of his handcuffs falling open. No one had moved. No key had turned. The deputies shouted his name, fumbling for flashlights, but the beams barely pierced the darkness, as if the light itself was being swallowed. The interpreter's voice trembled. "She's inside now." A faint outline appeared near the door, taller than a woman, yet impossibly thin, its arms long enough to brush the floor. The child's voice giggled softly, the sound bouncing off the walls in every direction, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. The suspect stood, chains clinking softly as they slid from his wrists to the floor. "She's here for the truth," he said. "And you can't stop her." Somewhere in the blackness, the sound of dripping water turned into something else. A slow, steady heartbeat, loud enough that everyone could feel it in their chest. It pulsed through the floor, vibrating the legs of the table, making coffee cups rattle and pens roll toward the edge. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes, whether they could see or not, was locked in the same place, on the faint silhouette by the door. The suspect tilted his head toward the sound, breathing in as if savoring the moment. "You feel that?" he whispered. "That's not her heart." The sheriff's voice cracked just slightly. "Then whose is it?" The suspect's lips curled. "Theirs." The heartbeat grew louder, so loud it seemed to press against the walls, shrinking the room inch by inch. A sharp snap rang out, and the table between them split down the middle, as if struck by something invisible. The deputies raised their guns, but before they could take aim, a cold, wet wind swept through the room, carrying the smell of river water and wilted jasmine. The interpreter's knees buckled. "She's marking this place." The suspect stepped forward into the darkness, and the shadow at the door moved with him, its limbs bending in ways that made no human sense. Somewhere outside, a dog began howling, long, mournful, and suddenly cut short. The silence that followed was worse than the howl. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. The sheriff's flashlight flickered once, then steadied just enough to catch a glimpse, a pale, wet hand sliding around the edge of the doorframe. Its fingers were too long, the nails blackened and sharp, dripping water that hissed when it hit the floor. The suspect turned to face it, his posture almost reverent. "She's been waiting," he said softly. "You kept her locked out, but they let her in." The interpreter whispered something in his own language, words so quiet they seemed meant only for himself. The hand tightened against the frame, and the wood groaned under the pressure. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps again, but this time they weren't dragging. They were fast, deliberate. The suspect smiled wider. "She doesn't like being kept waiting." Then, without warning, the door burst open. A rush of freezing air slammed into the room, snuffing out every remaining light. And in that instant of total blackness, someone screamed, a raw, panicked sound that ended far too quickly. The scream was cut off so suddenly. It felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The deputies called out, but their voices came back warped, as if they were shouting underwater. Somewhere in the dark, footsteps moved again, but now they were inside the room, circling slowly. The sheriff's hand fumbled for his gun, but the moment his fingers closed around it, an icy grip clamped over his wrist. He froze. The touch was wet, skin slick like it had just emerged from deep water. A breath brushed against his ear, soft, deliberate, and carrying the faintest hum of that same lullaby. The interpreter's voice trembled. "She's choosing." "Choosing what?" the sheriff managed to rasp. The answer didn't come from the interpreter. It came from the suspect. His voice low, almost tender. Who goes back with her? Then the darkness shifted. And in the brief flash of lightning through the window, the sheriff saw her face. Pale eyes black as ink. Her mouth opening far wider than humanly possible. And in that impossible mouth, he thought he saw movement. Small hands. Pressing against the inside. As if trying to get out. The sight froze him to the spot. Every instinct screaming to look away. But something in those black eyes held him still. The tiny hands inside her mouth writhed. Their pale fingers scraping against her teeth. Leaving faint trails of blood that vanished into the darkness of her throat. The child's voice giggled again. This time from inside her. Muffled but unmistakably real. The suspect stepped closer. His chains dragging softly across the wet floor. They didn't die in that house, he said. They're still with her, and they're not alone. The sheriff's stomach turned. What do you mean, not alone? She moved before he could blink. Her face now inches from his. The stench of stagnant water filling his lungs. Her lips didn't move. But her voice poured into his head. Cold and heavy. A language he didn't understand yet somehow knew was meant for him. Behind him, one of the deputies shouted. Then the sound was cut short by a wet tearing noise. Followed by something heavy hitting the floor. The heartbeat returned. Faster now. Matching the sheriff's own. The suspect's smile didn't waver. She's taking what's owed. And then, from somewhere deep within the shadows, another voice joined the lullaby. Older, rougher. And it was calling the sheriff's name. The sound of his name twisted through the dark. Each syllable stretching longer than it should. As if the voice was pulling him toward it. He tried to answer. But his throat locked tight. The air refusing to move past his lips. The interpreter stumbled backward. Pressing himself against the far wall. Muttering prayers in a language older than Thai. The wet footsteps moved again. Closer this time. Until they stopped directly behind the sheriff. A cold droplet slid down the back of his neck. Trailing slowly beneath his collar. The suspect tilted his head. His voice barely above a whisper. She's marked you. Lightning flashed outside. Illuminating the room for a heartbeat. Just long enough for the sheriff to see shapes in the corners. Figures. Dozens of them. Some the size of children. Others impossibly tall. Their limbs wrong, bending at unnatural angles. When the light died, their breathing filled the room. The voice called his name again. But now it was inside his head. Each word pulsing like a drumbeat in his skull. He felt his legs begin to move. Not by his own will. One step, then another. Toward the shadow at the doorway. The shadow seemed to swell as he approached. Its edges bleeding into the walls and ceiling. Until it was no longer just at the doorway. It was the doorway. The figures in the corners began to shift. Closing in without a sound. Their movements jerky. As though something was pulling their strings from above. The sheriff's boots splashed through the thin layer of water on the floor. Each step colder than the last. Until it felt like his feet were sinking into something deeper than tile. The interpreter's voice broke through the hum for an instant. Don't step into her shadow. But the sheriff couldn't stop. The pull was too strong. The suspect stood perfectly still. Watching like a man admiring a painting. You'll see it too, he said softly. You'll see what they saw. The child's giggle returned. But now it echoed from beyond the shadow. As if waiting for him inside. Another flash of lightning lit the hall. And for a split second, the shadow became a black river. Stretching endlessly into a place where no light could exist. And there, standing in the center of it, was the Miller family. They were smiling. Too widely. Their eyes as black as hers. The sheriff froze mid-step. His breath catching in his throat. The Millers raised their hands in unison. Beckoning him forward. Their movements slow and unnatural. like puppets suspended on invisible strings. Water dripped steadily from their fingertips, splattering against the river's surface, and sending ripples that stretched toward his boots. "Come home," Mrs. Miller's voice said. But her lips never moved. The sound came from everywhere at once. Inside his head, behind his ears, under his feet. The little girl tilted her head, her smile curling unnaturally wide. "You're almost one of us." The sheriff tried to step back, but the water clung to his boots like tar, holding him in place. From somewhere deep in the black current, the lullaby began again, but slower now, each note sinking heavy into his bones. The suspect took a step toward the river, his eyes shining in the dim light. "She's offering you what she offered them," he said. "Freedom from the truth you've been hiding." The sheriff's heart pounded. "I'm not hiding anything," he said through gritted teeth. The suspect's smile widened. "That's what they all say, right before she shows them." The miller's eyes seemed to grow darker, the black swallowing what little white was left. Then the little girl reached into the water and pulled something up. It was a badge. His badge. The sheriff froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat. The Millers raised their hands in unison, beckoning him forward, their movements slow and unnatural, like puppets suspended on invisible strings. Water dripped steadily from their fingertips, splattering against the river's surface, and sending ripples that stretched toward his boots. "Come home," Mrs. Miller's voice said. But her lips never moved. The sound came from everywhere at once. Inside his head, behind his ears, under his feet. The little girl tilted her head, her smile curling unnaturally wide. "You're almost one of us." The sheriff tried to step back, but the water clung to his boots like tar, holding him in place. From somewhere deep in the black current, the lullaby began again, but slower now, each note sinking heavy into his bones. The suspect took a step toward the river, his eyes shining in the dim light. "She's offering you what she offered them," he said. "Freedom from the truth you've been hiding." The sheriff's heart pounded. "I'm not hiding anything," he said through gritted teeth. The suspect's smile widened. "That's what they all say, right before she shows them." The miller's eyes seemed to grow darker, the black swallowing what little white was left. Then the little girl reached into the water and pulled something up. It was a badge. His badge. The sheriff's stomach dropped, his mind scrambling to understand how it could be there, dripping in the little girl's small, pale hand. He reached instinctively for his chest, but the badge was gone, torn from him without him feeling a thing. The girl turned it over slowly, her black eyes fixed on his, then lowered it back into the water. It didn't sink. It floated, spinning gently, and in its reflection he saw something that wasn't his face. A version of himself stood in the shimmer, soaked to the bone, skin pale and cracked like river stone, eyes dark as the miller's. The figure in the reflection smiled and lifted its hand in greeting. Behind him, the suspect's voice slid through the darkness. "She's already claimed you. The rest is just ceremony." The Millers stepped aside in perfect unison, revealing a narrow path of black water, leading deeper into the shadow. The smell of stagnant river and rotting jasmine thickened in the air, wrapping around him like a cold fog. Somewhere far behind, the interpreter shouted his name, but it sounded faint now, as if he were calling from miles away. The sheriff's foot began to lift, ready to take that first step into the water. And then, a hand, warm, human, grabbed his arm from behind. The sudden warmth jolted through him like an electric shock, cutting through the cold pull of the shadow. He spun around, half expecting to see one of his deputies, but the face staring back was a stranger's, a man in his late 50s, drenched as if he'd been pulled from the same black water. Yet his eyes were human, bloodshot, terrified, and desperate. "Don't step in," the man gasped, his voice hoarse. "She doesn't let you come back." The sheriff froze. The Millers still waiting behind him, their smiles unbroken. The suspect tilted his head at the newcomer, his expression shifting to something almost amused. "Well," he said slowly, "looks like one got out." The man's grip tightened on the sheriff's arm. "I didn't get out," he said. "She let me go." Lightning flashed again, and for an instant the sheriff saw the truth. The man's shadow didn't match his body. It was longer, and it was moving on its own. The Millers began humming again, their voices blending with the lullaby until it became one endless, droning note that pressed against the inside of his skull. The man leaned in close, whispering so softly the sheriff almost didn't hear him. "She's not here for you." The sheriff's pulse pounded in his ears. "Then who?" The man's eyes flicked past him, toward the corner of the room, where the interpreter was standing completely still, his lips moving in silent prayer. The sheriff turned his head toward the interpreter, and the moment his gaze landed, the humming stopped. The silence hit harder than the sound. The interpreter's eyes were shut tight, his face pale as candle wax, but his lips kept moving, faster now, almost frantic. The suspect took a slow step toward him, chains dragging through the water. "Oh," he murmured. "She's been in him all along." The sheriff's gut clenched. He'd known the interpreter for years, trusted him in more than one investigation. But now the air around him shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt, and faint ripples spread from his feet in the water. The stranger's grip on the sheriff's arm tightened. "If she takes him, she won't stop here." The Millers moved in closer, their smiles fading into something colder, more hollow. Behind them, the black river began to churn. The sheriff could barely hear his own thoughts over the pounding in his head. "What happens if we stop her?" The stranger's eyes flicked toward the shadow. "You can't. You can only trade." The suspect's smile deepened. "Someone always stays." A cold wind swept through the room, carrying the scent of river mud and decay. The interpreter's eyes snapped open, and they were pure black. The Millers turned their heads in perfect unison, looking straight at the sheriff, and in a single voice, they spoke words that made the water rise to his knees. "Choose." The sheriff stood frozen, the word hanging in the air like a blade. "Choose." The water lapped higher against his legs, icy enough to burn, while the interpreter's black eyes locked onto his. The stranger beside him whispered urgently, "She won't wait long." The Millers waited in the shadowed current, their hands outstretched, their smiles gone now, their faces unreadable. The suspect leaned casually against the table, as if this were all nothing more than a conversation. "It's simple," he said. "One walks out, one stays with her. That's the price." The sheriff's chest tightened. He thought of the deputies who had already vanished into the dark, the lives already swallowed by whatever this was. If he stayed, this thing might end here. But if he chose wrong, it might spread far beyond this room. The water surged again, and in it, he saw the badge floating toward him, spinning slowly. His reflection stared back, his black mouth curled into a smile that wasn't his own. The lullaby began once more, quieter now, almost gentle, and he understood. She didn't just want a body, she wanted someone who would let her in. The interpreter's lips moved one last time, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff stepped forward, the water swallowing him to the waist. His decision made. Behind him, the stranger shouted something, a warning, a plea. But the current pulled hard, and the shadow opened wider to take him. The last thing he heard was the suspect's voice, low and certain. "Now she has what she came for." And then the water closed over his head.